Peter Vincent's name. In Fright Night, we see the movie's secondary hero, the washed-up, middle-aged horror movie actor Peter Vincent, who hosts a midnight horror show called Fright Night, who by the end of the movie regains some of his motivation back into life. The character is a homage to old horror movies, and if you need proof of this, then just look at the character's name, Peter Vincent, as the character is named after Vincent Price and Peter Cushing, two legendary veterans of horror days. However, Roddy McDowall, who played Peter Vincent, also put his own spin on the character too, as he did not want to play the part like Vincent Price as originally scripted. He wanted to portray the character as a failed actor, just more or less starring as the same cheesy character in every movie he has starred in.
Now, I used to admire you, you know that? Well, of course, that was before I found out what a fake you were.
Which does give the character more of a washed-up, failed approach, and adds an extra dynamic into the character. However, jump to the 2010 back on the original movie, McDowall's approach of the role must have worked, as Vincent Price himself apparently loved the movie. Number 4. To date, there are 4 Fright Night movies. Whenever Fright Night gets brought up, more than often people are going to instantly think of the original 1985 movie. However, there was a sequel in 1988, which saw Charlie Brewster go to college, where this time Jerry's sister, Regine, is hunting the hapless teenager, and even takes over Peter Vincent's Fright Night show. For some strange reason, Fright Night 2 had very limited release, which I believe caused it to be not very well known and to slip under the radar, so to speak, because it's actually not really a bad film. Then in 2010 we got the remake, which is a retelling of the original Fright Night, only this time it's set in Las Vegas and feels more like a contemporary horror movie, rather than a homage to the horror days of old. As mentioned, the film stars David Tennant as Peter Vincent, and Colin Farrell as Jerry, who I think actually does a really good job and makes the character really creepy and sinister and intimidating. However, I find the remake hard to watch now, on the account of the death of its main star Anton Yelchin, who recently passed away. However, we then get Fright Night 2, New Blood, and this is where things get really confusing. Released in 2013, you would think that this straight-to-video release was a sequel to the 2010 remake, with them even following the tropes of the original Fright Night 2, of making the main villain a female vampire. But that's not true, as this is actually yet another remake of the original Fright Night. Yep, the same story just told all over again, only this time it really sucked. And calling it Fright Night 2 literally makes no sense. Number 3. Fright Night's comics. Released by Now Comics, which ran from 1988 to 1990, the Fright Night comics furthers the adventures of Charlie Brewster and Peter Vincent's struggles against the blood-sucking vampires of the night. In stories that include taking on bats who latch onto people's heads and control their bodies, along with a really bizarre issue where the police actually enlist Charlie and Peter's help to stop some menacing squid men. Okay. And another issue about a boy who can transform himself into a spider. In other words, this comic was pretty batshit insane, and had some wild and far out there ideas. The series would even see the return of the Evil Ed character, who wants to get out revenge on his old friend Charlie, and even has gangs of minions. Number 2, the Fright Night sequel which never happened. Although as mentioned, Fright Night would go on to see a sequel and string of remakes, Tom Holland had number 1, alternative ending. Oh yeah, I had to save the weirdest for last, as the planned ending for Fright Night just would have been awful, and would have really missed the mark had it not been changed, as the alternative ending would have seen Peter Vincent turn into a vampire while hosting a late night episode of Fright Night. This really does kind of go against the character's journey and development we see him go through in the film, so I'm glad this idea was binned. That, and it's just insanely similar to the ending of Howling, which sees a news reporter turn into a werewolf on live TV. So people would have just assumed that the ending was a rip-off, and thus might have not liked the movie as much, which could have affected its eventual cult status.